right.
Got it. All right. All right. Good morning, everybody. You get to listen to me for a little while. We have John on standby and Susan on standby if questions come out based on areas that I need their expertise on. But this morning, I know I've heard a lot of discussion, a lot of asks around the business process of what to do when somebody leaves an organization. I think the current term you guys talk about is custodial accounts and what that means. And we'll cover that in the starting point, as well as I'll cover it from the ownership of their work, let's say their contracts or their POs or recs, the receipts, as well as what to do with things that might be in the process flow where they're in the approval queue. Okay. And we'll start with the easy one about approval queue. I will try to talk in the new solution terminology. I know it's a little hard, but I'm trying to use those terms and get away from things like custodial accounts and really kind of talk at the level of what we need to do in the new solution, a little bit of why. Then we'll probably take a break. Then most likely get into kind of the security angle of the solution. What profiles do we give users and what does that do? And a little bit of where that's done. And how that's done, and we'll see where we head from there. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about, I'll run a couple of scenarios. I'm logged in as myself. You can see I have a to-do list, and you guys tell me when we hit the scenarios. This one might have a couple of scenarios, but the idea that I am an active employee, but for whatever reason I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go on vacation tomorrow, or not even tomorrow. I'm already on vacation. And there's something stuck in my approval queue. Barb mentioned it yesterday. The standard is that we don't normally have one person in an approval profile. So if I'm on vacation, Ishmael can approve my stuff, right? That's the standard, so we don't run into this situation. But inside of I value a new solution, you can delegate your approval authority for whatever reason. In this case, I'll show you, there's a couple ways to do it. I'll show you the very easiest way to do it in my mind. Users can delegate their authority to others. So if it's in my approval queue, I can give it to somebody. As well as administratively, if we know somebody is out of the office, right? Let's say I know I went on vacation, I forgot to delegate, and in front, Ishmael in my organization, if he has user management rights, could go in and set up my delegation on my profile. So let me just show you that, and then we'll talk about how it's done. So if I just go look, I'm an administrator, but every user has his privilege. But if I look at my profile, and I think you guys saw this yesterday when John brought up a user profile. This is my user profile, what I have control over. You can see there's a delegate section. You can see I already did a delegation for Ann, but I'm going to, that's okay. I'll leave that. I was just verifying. If I want to set up that somebody else is going to be my delegate. So I left for vacation yesterday. Okay. So on 7/25, I left. Well, actually, I'll do the first one. I'm leaving for vacation on 8/1. Okay. And from 8/1 to 8/10, I want Shane to be my approver. Actually, I probably should use Ishmael because he's in my organization. So to do that, if I want to do this in advance, is again, just how this would work. And actually, I'll type Shane. Nope. I'll just use somebody in my organization. So we'll say, for giggles, we'll say Anna. I'm going to give my delegation, my approval task to Anna, and I'm going to be on vacation from 8/1 to 8/5. It's spinning right now. It's looking, but it's going to go ahead and set up this delegation. So any approval that's routed to my ID between 8/1 and 8/5 will still route to my ID, but it will be what Ivalio calls delegated additionally to Anna. So let me show you what that looks like. What do I mean by additionally delegated? You can see I did one yesterday or a while ago for Ann to take my approvals from 7/11 to 7/29. When you set this up, the system looks. If you backdate it, the system went and looked for any approvals between 7/11, 7/29 to me, and also added and. So how do you view that? Easiest thing to view it. If I look at my to-do list to understand this, delegation, you can see it. The initial performer is who got the task. So initially it was given to me. Workflow said, Mark's in this profile. Mark should be in the approval of this supplier activation. You can see I got a couple of things around here. Supplier activation. Because and then it'll show who I've delegated it to. So in this case, I've delegated to Ann. So what does that mean in iValue? That means either me or Ann could take the action. I could still approve if I wanted to and move it on or reject. And if I log in as Ann, you will also see it in her list as well. Okay. So if you run into a situation, why did I backdate this? Let's say Shane's gone. Shane's out of the office already and there's something hanging in his approval queue. I can backdate these on. So we talk about administratively. I forget to do it. If we have user access, I have all powers right now. So if I take Shane's ID. As an administrator, which you guys will be for organizations, right? As an administrator, I can also come to Shane's profile and go to his user preferences. And let's say Shane was already out of the office, right? And we had something. So Shane was out of the office. So I'm gonna give his approvals to Lisa. Now this is filtering based on my organization. So I need to uncheck a box. Hold on. We have a lot of security around what users you see. So you can see here, active and blocked, but internal contact. But let me go ahead and hit Lisa. Come on. All right, there's Lisa Kirby. So let's pretend Shane left. And Shane, I'm sorry if we blow up some of your approvals. But you probably won't care. It's just going to add a delegate. So now as an administrator, right? Somebody called you, said, hey, Shane's not here. He's got a bunch of approvals. We need to get him over to Lisa. Now, granted, I think Lisa and Shane could do this on their own, but as an administrator in my organization, I've now done this. So now in Lisa's, and if I look at Shane's, so let me just prove. So I'm going to cheat here and log in as Shane. Right, and here's Shane's approvals. As Shane, if I look at Shane's to-do list, you'll see some delegations to Lisa. Where did I delegate them?
You did the wrong one.
What did I do?
You did the wrong one. You delegated everything. You didn't delegate the approval. You did the wrong box.
Oops, thank you.
You're welcome.
Moved too quickly. Hey, look, we all make mistakes. So I'm going to cheat. And Suing is me. Good. Thank you. The other one we're not going to do, we're going to probably never do, sign in as somebody else. I think we saw it on the screen. They give you the ability from a security standpoint. And I'll show you today. We should never, my profile. We should never be using this private access. That will go away in user management. I believe we're taking it off the screen and the things we're working on now. Somebody have a question there? I heard something.
I was just saying, don't show us.
Don't show you what?
What we're not going to do.
Yeah. I just made a mistake. Who was it? This was Shane, right? Sometimes I move a little too quickly. Where am I? Oh, I flipped environment. Sorry, I'm in the wrong. This one. Wrong screen. All right, so I'm in as Shane. I'll go back to Shane's profile. Make the correction. All right, I made a mistake. I will correct it. We will never do this. I believe this is getting removed from the screen as part of our user management changes coming soon. That creates a security risk where you can somebody else logging in as you. That's what you guys do today in custodial, but we don't want to do that anymore. Lisa Kirby, Shane left the other day. He's coming back. I'll add this. So what it's doing right now is looking for those approvals and making that assignment. So if I look at Shane's to-do list now, I should find if he has some. He may not have had any during that time frame. I'll have to look. He didn't have any, but you guys understand. You would see this delegated to column. He did not have any in that time frame. I would have to change the time frames that I did it. But that's how you would set up somebody else's delegation at any point in time. So let me just go back to this profile. So to set up a delegation, give it a user. Again, it can be done by the individual, but if you guys, as an account exec, if somebody's looking for help, you can also do it on behalf of them if you have user management rights. You choose which user, and then the time period. And these dates are not required. So if you just set one up blindly, it'll just always go to them. Like if somebody leaves or whatever reason, if it's for a time period, you can put time period. If it's from a certain date forward, you can just put a from date. So you don't have to use these dates. You can use them as you want. Okay. We're talking about delegation. That is what. Let me pull up my sheet to cover a couple of scenarios here to make sure because I know you guys will ask, what if in a certain scenario? So where is my Word document? So I'm sharing my screen. Can you say Word document now?
Yes.
Okay. So the scenarios I had was Amy's on leave and currently has documents pending her approval, right? So the standard is she would have multiple, so you probably wouldn't have to do anything unless it was an ad hoc or something of that situation. But what I just showed you, you can easily set up approval delegations for Amy. You can backdate it, right? So I showed you that. I backdated how I would do it. Hit the plus button and it will go do the reassignments. Okay. The other way to do it, which I don't think is as nice, is to go directly to the to-do list, and I'll show you is the checkbox. It's another way to delegate. You can come to your list, select the things you want to delegate, hit delegate, and assign who it goes to. It's just, I think what you guys wind up doing is just go to the user profile and just move the transactions themselves, okay? So if Amy is going on leave in 15 days, and all of her approvals should go to Sam. Same process. Go to her profile, whether Amy does it herself or somebody does it for her. Go to the profile, set up a delegate, set up Sam as a delegate, and put the date range you want the delegation to happen. Okay. Anybody, so delegation is really all about just delegating or giving somebody else your power to approve that transaction. I'm going to stop there to see if there are questions on that or scenarios, because I know you guys I maybe have more scenarios than I can think of, but the delegation tool is pretty flexible as to how you would do it. Did I miss a scenario around just approval delegation, not how do I take over a contract or a PO or those types of things?
Mark, I just have a general question. Are we as AEs going to have the ability to sign in as another user in production once we go live?
You should not. There should not be a reason that you should sign it. You mean what I just did here, signing in as Shane?
Right.
Yeah, no, that's a non-production access only to facilitate testing.
So how would we as AEs do that delegation on someone's behalf?
From the user, so you will have user management. So if we go to user management, now I'm managing all users, and now I can pull up Ann's profile.
Okay.
And go to user preferences. No, it's a good question. It's available from both places, right?
Okay.
Go to user preferences, and then.
Okay.
That's why I put it in the wrong spot. It was below in the other screen and above in this screen.
So we can edit someone's profile. We just can't log in as them.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we do it in tests because it makes it really easy to test and really great, but it's security problem in production.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions or scenarios around delegating my approvals to someone else, whether it's a short-term, long-term, backdated, something stuck? A fairly easy process in iValua. And I think the really nice power is it doesn't take it out of your list. It just puts somebody else's ability to approve for you.
And Mark, this is Shane. We have had a request. Everybody likes your Word document because it's like a little roadmap.
Yep.
So we would love to have that after the training.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
I have to write that or write this thing. I owe you guys that stuff anyway. So, all right. Now on to a different scenario where Amy has retired. Good for Amy, right? She hit the lotto or hit the jackpot that's coming up. Hopefully all of you have spent at least 2 or 3 minutes thinking in the last couple of days what you will do if you win the big Powerball. But so Amy is left. And this will cover a couple topics, but I could really morphs into, I think, a lot of questions around. Very easy to understand. We deactivate the user and some other things, but what happens to transactions that Amy owns, right? So let me kind of walk through this. And then I'll walk through it both online in this scenario, but I want to just go through kind of the high level on this Word document first. So if Amy retires, the very first thing we would do is deactivate the user, right? I mean, that's, so on each user account, if somebody retires, whatever, leaves the organization, on each user, there's a status. Active means you can log in, you can do your work. Imported, you could ignore. Blocked is you really want to knock them out for some reason for the moment. They have a hacker, who knows. Blocked. Disabled is another category that doesn't let you in. This typically happens to your account if you've logged in too many times incorrectly and now you become disabled. And then deleted. I don't know the policy around when we leave. I'd probably rely on Yana. I'm not sure, or Shane. I'm assuming we put them in deleted status versus disabled, but
Yeah,
you'll move
that
them
is-
out of active.
That is correct. We had a discussion about this yesterday, and after 90 days of inactivity, meaning you haven't logged in, haven't touched your account, you would be simply moved to disabled. And that is more of a signal that you have an account, you're still with an organization, but for some reason you haven't logged in and you haven't had activity, you become disabled. Deleted, we are going to use, Mark, for the scenario you just had. Retired, left the organization, no longer in EVA, no longer with the state, no longer with the agency. That is when we would do the delete. The good news is, in both scenarios, if we make a mistake, we're not doing the type of cleanup that you had to do in the past, where you had to remove roles and do all this crazy stuff. You do not have to do that anymore. If somebody's even in deleted status, it's a logical delete, not a physical delete. And if we made a mistake or they decide to come out of retirement or come back to the organization, we can flip them back to active with no harm. Now, it's always a good idea, to make sure the roles are proper, addresses, phone numbers, email. I mean, you want to verify things. But the good news is, unlike what we're doing in our existing environment for a full delete, don't need to do all that. You can the filtering in iValua is better, and how people show up in roles. You just need to flip the status. You don't need to do anything else. So that's really good if we do need to come in and reactivate a user.
Hey, Felicia. So Shane or Mark, are you able to, let's say that they left ABC and now they're at DMV. And so we deleted them in ABC. Are we able to use that same profile and then just go back in and change their organization and all of that? Or will we have to create a new one?
I would not recommend that as a practice. It really is. If you think of their user account, I believe if they leave one organization, go to another, they're going to get a different email address anyway, right?
Correct.
So for data integrity purposes, what I'd recommend is, don't really want to move users across organizations because you really want to delete them in their current organization and add them to the other one. You can probably find a lot of those examples actually in the data if you look for people that have migrated across organizations and have EVA access. But yeah, you'd want to definitely set them to delete it in their current in the old organization and just set them up as a new profile in the new organization.
So Mark,
Examples of that in the spring.
well, that does drive a question, and I think I know the answer, but I want everybody to think about this business scenario. So that makes a lot of sense to me. If you leave DGS and you go to ABC, you will get a shane.caudill@abc.virginia.gov, which is a different email. So you can set up a unique account because that would be unique from my DGS address. But this has happened before, and I think Jan Giffen is a good example of this because she's actually done this. She was at DGS. She left to go, I think it was to Vita. And then after a few years, she came back to DGS.
Right.
So then would we be okay? So she had a DGS account, we would set it to delete. She goes to Vita, we give her a Vita account that's active. She leaves Vita, we would delete that account. Could we then reactivate her DGS account and then just confirm and update her roles and address and things like that?
You certainly could do that. You could reactivate. There's also, I'm just showing this example because I know Jan's in here twice. You can see there's two different IDs connected to Jan, same email address, right? But one of them is disabled and one is active. So you could do it either way. This is really kind of your guys' policy decisions. It may be beneficial to have this, to not reactivate the old and just create a new, so you have a little bit more audit trail. But that's a policy. The solution will allow you to do either. Okay. The only
Mark,
constraint on the solution is you cannot have somebody with the same email address on their user profile and both an active status. Okay.
Mark,
Yes.
Policy should be not to reactivate because Jan could have been the business manager.
Right.
Currently, and when she comes back to DGS, she could be the deputy director. So she should not have access to her old work that she did, and somebody else is now in that role.
Makes sense to me. Okay. Very good questions. But so from deactivating a user, like Shane mentioned, we flipped the status. That's not really this. That's not where I wanted to head on this conversation too far, but it led to some good what if scenarios, which is what you guys deal with. You would deactivate them. If they move to another organization, you got to set up the other organization, create a new account. Follow that same principle, like Sandra has mentioned. Even if they come back to that same account, then you'd probably want to create a new profile because their role may have changed, so that you're not making any mistakes in that area either. So deactivate the old, create new. Okay. Or disable or delete, move to deleted. And like Shane mentioned, these don't mean they go away. They're logical. We don't really delete things. They're logical deletes, so their users' records are still there and tied to transactions and tied to everything else. Okay. Once you move that person to a non-active status, so let's talk about it from question might call, what do I need to do about any approval delegations that happened to Amy, right? Amy retired, but she left 5 approvals still in her bucket before she left the office. Couple of choices. One, we talked about that hopefully Amy is not the only person in that role, but that's okay. We can go set up on her profile a delegation, right? That's easy. We talked about that before. Just put a delegation in and delegate to somebody else and move it forward. Any new transactions that come through won't land in Amy's approval box because Amy's no longer an active user. So it's really only the cleanup of some of her older things. So similar to what we talked about before, if we need to, we just set up a delegation. It then puts the delegation, it immediately takes action to delegate to the other persons that need to approve those transactions now that Amy is no longer here. Okay. So that kind of takes care of not getting her in the system anymore. What I do to her existing approvals that are pending, right? We just do a delegation similar to as if she was just on vacation. Now let's talk about, this is where we start to talk a little bit about security, but I'm not going to go in really depth details there, but security drives some of these decisions. So what happens to requisitions that Amy owned? And when I talk about ownership on a requisition, we're really talking about where she was the requester, right? Somebody put her as the requester. Let me just pull up the screen so I talk the right terminology. She's in this field as the requester, right? The person that this is being done for, or she was the person who created this transaction, or what we consider to be the preparer. You don't see the preparer here, but it's the user who did the transaction, and it is logged in the system. So the system, when we talk about requisitions, when somebody goes and what requisitions they have access to, this is where we start more of a little bit in security, where they really have access into, and I know Joel dealt with this recently, who can edit my requisition, not approve, just edit. The requisitions, it's really around the idea that if you were the requester or the preparer, you kind of own that requisition. So we don't necessarily, if we look at what happened, so Amy left the organization and she had processed 15 requisitions and they've already been approved. Well, what happens to a requisition after it's approved? It becomes a PO, and we'll deal with how to manage the POs later. An approved requisition doesn't really need any ownership. You can't change a requisition, right? It's kind of a one-time transaction, so you don't necessarily need ownership over making a change to an older requisition. So what happens if Amy started a requisition and it's in the approval process, but she's no longer here? She was either the creator or the requisitioner, and it's in the approval cycle. Well, you got a choice, right? If it's in process, it obviously could be approved. If it still was the needed thing, regardless of who the requester or creator was, if it's still a needed item, it could be approved. If the requester needed to change, it could be denied or copied. So you have a business choice for what to do with any in-process requisitions that were either done by Amy or for Amy. Does that make sense? Okay. Now we talked, so really from a reassignment of a requisition, what that leads to is you don't need to do anything to move that requisition to somebody else or provide custodial accounts so somebody else can take action on it. Okay. Purchase orders. So the requisition fully approved becomes a PO, right? You see, I have no reassignment needed. Why do we say that? So when we talk about security in a couple minutes, we'll talk about this, but from a purchase order perspective, when I go to, I'm in a Shane, which is good. So when Shane goes to view his orders, these orders are limited. Now Shane may have a couple extra things, but it's limited to Shane's what organization Shane's has access to. And I don't know, Shane's got a bunch because Shane's a powerful user. I could probably switch to somebody else that's not quite as powerful, but my browse order list is controlled, so I only see orders that match my organization, right? So it's not assigned, POs aren't necessarily assigned to an individual user. So that's what we're saying. We don't need to reassign them to somebody else. When I look at a PO, right, the organization really driving who can view that PO, okay? Later, the profiles, when I get into profiles, will drive who can do a change order, who can do a cancel, who can do a receipt. And it's not tied to the individual user who started the requisition. It's more organizationally controlled. So yes, there is a buyer contact on here. And that was the original requestor. But because that's not driving who can do the action, you should not need to reassign a PO to somebody else, because organizationally, if I have the right profile, if I have the requester profile, which we'll talk about, I can make changes to orders, receipts, and do cancellations within my organization. So it's not tied to a specific user. Okay. That's why I say no reassignments needed, because no individual owner to this PO. Logically there is, but from a security standpoint, there is not like the requisition where it's only the requester and the creator. Okay. Again, this is just we'll get down to where there might be some reassignment. Returns and receipts are the same as POs, how they're secured by an organization, by organizational profile as to who can do a receipt return, a cancel PO, and an amend PO is all organizationally controlled and through a profile controlled. So if you have the employee profile or not the employee, but the requisitioner profile, you can do these actions. So again, they're not tied to a specific user, so you don't need to move them from one user to the next, right? That's why it's set up that way. I think it does bode well, because moving transactions, especially transactions that have occurred, can also cause some data integrity issues. If you look at it from a data retention, who did this transaction kind of perspective, it causes some issues. I know you guys do use custodial accounts now, because I think some of these other views are more locked down. And that causes problems and causes, kind of security issues that you're logging in as somebody else. We no longer have that need to log in as somebody else to close down that security issue. Okay. So sourcing events and contracts are a little bit different. On a sourcing event, and again, we're not going through all these, I just want to show you for the purposes of this. On a sourcing event, we'll just pick one, and it doesn't matter where. Sourcing events and contracts have a special area called teams. So and the sourcing event is a solicitation. We'll deal with that later. But on a sourcing event or a sourcing project, you can build an internal team. In this case, it's only Govind. Let me pull up one that might make a little more sense. Most of these, because we're coming through conversion, are only going to have one person, because we didn't necessarily have this team concept as much, but at least have better data on here. So Tracy Robinson is responsible for sourcing. Tracy could also add Shane to her team as a subject matter expert. Okay, so you can build a team to this. So those people are involved in this sourcing project. I'll get to what that means. I just wanted to show you the team concept. Same concept exists for contracts. So on a contract, there is this internal team. Okay. So in this case, Tracy's there. And again, you could add somebody else to your team and give them a profile. I'll get to what those mean later, but I just want you to understand the team concept for how this works. So they're on this team. All right. So in my example, let's pretend Tracy's leaving, right? So Tracy has both sourcing and contract documents that she's part of the team. Do we need to do anything to reassign those to somebody else? If I look at this, I just want to talk about this. So sourcing events, and we'll change this from Amy to Tracy. So Tracy, is Tracy on any teams? Okay, I said, if yes, review the sourcing and determine who, if anyone, needs to be added to the team to replace her. So how do you do that? Look at the sourcing projects. You saw on my search here, this contact. So what this will do, will look for any sourcing event where Tracy's on the team. So Tracy's got 9 different things where she's on the team. Not a tremendous amount. So this is probably a good example. You want to go through. Now, remember, multiple people can be on a team. So you would want to review these to determine, okay, does it make sense to move from Tracy to somebody else? Now, if I only had one, I probably should put somebody else, right? If the team had 15 people long, maybe I don't need to move Tracy into it. Okay. So on the sourcing events, a little bit about how we want to do this. This is really a business decision. There is no need to do a reassignment on a sourcing event for the system to work as it's currently set up, because when I go to sourcing, you get to see the sourcing projects that match your organization and your user profile. There are two different profiles that you have to see sourcing. If I look at Shane's profile, let me go back to his. Let me go in as an admin. Go here. So why does Shane get to see sourcing? See if Shane has a profile for sealed sourcing. That gives him access to view projects. Which projects? The projects or sourcing events that match his organizational perimeter. Very similar to the way we do an Advantage today. That, and even VBO, if you have access to those tools, right? Now this is different. This gives you access to that portion, but similar concept. So this gave me access to sourcing. And then my organization controls what I can see. So on a sourcing event, yes, there are teams that you can sign to a sourcing event, which really kind of own the sourcing event. But from an access and security standpoint, very similar to Advantage, that these sourcing events can be worked by anybody in your organization that may need to have access, right? So you don't have an absolute need to move them to somebody else. It's good hygiene and good practice to probably change who's on the team, but the solution would still work if Shane went into Tracy's sourcing project and had to take it over, okay? Because they're in the same organization and Shane has the sealed sourcing profile, okay? Contracts are a little bit different. Contracts, while having the team concept, similar to sourcing, has an additional piece of security. Contracts, you have view access into your organizational contracts, right? And what you can see, which is right. But contracts, who can edit this contract is determined by who's on this team. So if Tracy was to leave and we did nothing, nobody would have access other than administrator, like system administrator, like ourselves, to manage this contract, right? Do an amendment, do a change, do extra work, change documents, whatever it may be. So contracts are a little more tightly secured by who's on the internal team, okay? Well, in this case, I reviewed this, same thing on the browser. So Tracy's leaving, so let me go review Tracy's contracts. All right, so Tracy's got one contract, so I can manage that fairly easily as an organizational level and come in, even though this contract is running, which is good. Can't touch the actual contract without making an amendment, but who's on the team is kind of supplemental to the contract, so you can manage that throughout the life cycle. That's why this has edit access, so that now if I need to, I can put Shane on the team. And one other step here, there's some different profiles we'll get into what responsible versus contributed does, but I can easily put Shane on the team, and if I want to replace make him responsible for the contract, and essentially what we end up doing is we delete Tracy because Tracy's no longer in the organization. Now Shane has access to this, to edit this contract and manage this contract. So there is one piece here when we look at where do I have to move transactions? Contracts is the one. Why? Because contracts are secured by who's on this team. Okay. Now, there is a secondary piece to this. What do I do if there's, Mark, what happens if there's 400 of these contracts attached to Shane? I don't want to go manually and do this, right? There is an admin function. In this case, we would ask if you put in a JIRA ticket for help, just like we do. It's kind of like a data fix, right? You know, too many to handle on our own. We need some help, right? We want to reassign all these this particular way. There is an admin function to the tool. It's essentially a data fix, but we are not prepared, nor do I think we want to open this up to a larger set. But there is a reassignment tool where I can come in. And if I wanted to move things from Tracy, actually, I just did Shane, so let me do Shane to Lisa for my contracts. And you'll see in a second why we don't expect anybody but a system administrator to do this. It's not really it's a very powerful tool. And you have to understand a lot about iValua structure to do it. What it's doing right now is it's looking system-wide for things attached to Shane that they can move to Lisa. Anywhere that field's used, there is a table. This, yeah, again, people, you wouldn't know this unless you know iValua. This relationship to team login is where this would be. And what we end up doing, this one didn't have records, so I must not have saved it yet. Let me switch my two users and go back to Tracy. Oops. Come on. So this, you guys would put a ticket in, and if we had to reassign things in a mass, you can see there was like 1,000 things out there to Tracy, but there is this login team. So Tracy's one contract, right? Let's pretend that had 25, 30, 50. We can do that and click reassign, and that will move it. I don't think Tracy's going to care if I just do this one. So I will just do it just to process it. What this does is it just runs a database update to the things I've told it to this object and moves it from Tracy to Lisa and adds Lisa on the team. So you can see now I don't have anything where Tracy is the internal contact. And if I look for Lisa, so this would be, you would put in a ticket. I just wanted to show you that the tool is available. So what it did, we only did it once. We'd never do this for a one-off. This would be if somebody left the organization and they owned, 100 contracts. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. But if we need to make a larger change, put in the JIRA ticket. I wanted you to understand, hey, we need these contracts reassigned. And then it's you can saw it was immediate, didn't take an overnight cycle, didn't take long. As soon as we get the ticket and understand who it is, you process the change and we're on our merry way. Okay. I'm going to pause there because I know it was a lot, but I wanted to get to hopefully cover it. And I think you guys will have some questions around your custodial process now to where we're not really using a custodial process. We don't have a need to move a lot of transactions other than contracts. But go ahead, shoot at me.
Yeah, Mark. So I just want to be clear for a sourcing event,
Mhm.
the example you use, we do not have to add Shane as a responsible and delete Tracy. We don't have to do anything. Is that what you're telling us? For sourcing event?
Correct. Yeah, sourcing is secured, and we'll get into this after the break. But yes, the way sourcing security is, it's by your organization, tells you what you can see, and then your profile, right? If it's sealed sourcing, tells you if you can make sourcing changes.
Okay, and
It's
we
not
don't
driven by who's. What's that?
And we don't even have to add Shane to the team. as long as
Correct.
he has that field sourcing internal profile.
Correct. The team is not used for security on sourcing projects at this time.
Hey, Mark, it's Bree.
Yep.
Follow to Kimberly's question. If we do nothing to an open sourcing event,
Mhm.
what's the contact information? Like, how do they know to contact Shane?
When someone leaves, yeah.
If he's not the responsible person,
Right.
how do we know? How does the vendor community know who to get in contact with if they have questions?
Yeah, and that's yeah, I would, so business process wise, right? I'm just saying logically I don't have to, but business process wise, if I look at, so that's a good question, right? Yeah, very good question, right? How would you know? The buyer information, you probably would want to do an amendment to change the buyer. I am very hesitant. The tool that I showed you, Reassignment, can do some of those inline data updates. But really what it does is changes transactions that regardless of status, it's like a massive SQL. I hesitate to say we should do that because what ends up happening is data warehouse, data retention, all these things get goofy. Lisa's got her fingers crossed. Do you have something to add there, Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a little bit because those are two different things. And Bree, so if you want to make sure the vendor community is updated, then you do have to go in and do an amendment to the solicitation itself. Because where Mark is showing you the reassignment of team members, that information is kind of like the procurement folder assignments that we have in the current system now. So it's more about shifting the procurement folders is what he was showing rather than changing the assignment on an active solicitation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's more of a business from a business practice standpoint, like Lisa said, if you have an open procurement, you know, the buyer information needs to change, then the avenue is yes, you do an amendment, right?
So I understand the need for updating the solicitation. I guess I'm thinking like currently VBO shows this. If I update from Tracy to Shane on the procurement folder, will that change that shell of who is the person on VBO?
Let me take a note. I'll check during the break to where we pull the buyer information from. Fair enough.
Thank
Because honestly, I have to look or ask Rich or Tracy. Tracy probably knows. Tracy, do you know off the top of your head before I look?
Could you repeat that? I couldn't hear. I'm sorry.
It was just a question of the public posting. Where does the buyer information come from? Is it just this created on, or is it something different?
The
Or is it
internal
the-
team.
It does come from the internal team. Okay, so we might. All right, I'll double check during the break, upcoming, and get the specifics because that may drive that if we add Shane, then Shane shows up. If Shane is a responsible sourcing, he might show up as the buyer. So we might have an avenue there without doing an amendment. So I will double check. Very good question.
Thank you.
Yep. Is that really all the questions we have around this? I know the custodial. When I looked at it, I was very pleasantly pleased on how, it fits together and the custodial concept. And I think what we have here is probably gonna be a lot better and cleaner for how to deal with the movement of things.
Yeah, I do have another question. This is Kimberly. So,
Sure.
delegation and reassignment of work are two different things. So we
Yeah.
as APs are not going to have access to do any type of reassignments. Is that true or false?
So when I talk about reassignments, I think when we looked at this, it was really about reassignment. The only part where we said we probably have to reassign something is around the contract, right? So as account executive, depending on the profile we set up, and you will have access, I believe, and I can double check. You would have access to come into and help somebody on this account if they needed to change this and they couldn't do it themselves. But honestly, yeah, I wouldn't, there's nothing stopping the owning organization from making this change on their own, right? I wouldn't volunteer to do it for them. Tell them, go to your internal team, put whoever should be the responsible contact, and you're done, right?
Okay. So the procurement director, manager, chief procurement officer, whatever we want to call them today, should have the ability to do this.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Now, the other tool I showed, the reassignment tool, I think that's going to be just like data fixes are today, a purely kind of CGI function through a JIRA ticket. They can happen very quickly, right? You saw there's not a whole lot to it, but there's too many other things under that cover which could cause a lot of problems.
All right.
I think even so, as part of this too, I know we had a ticket out there, this will come up. What happens? So yeah, it's kind of the proof to this pudding, and you guys can look at it in UAT as well. What happens to, I know we have users that used to have multiple accounts connected to the same email, right? I think Lisa brought up, who was it? Casey McCullough had like 4 accounts tied to the same email. As part of conversion, we said, oh, we can only have 1 active user per email address, right? Just like, I think, let me take this off. And what is it? Casey McCullough?
Kenneth?
Kenneth,
McCullough?
thank you. Hopefully that'll get me close. Just to illustrate this, when you guys look at this from testing, right? You can see he used to have, right, 3 or 4, actually 5 accounts. Now he has 1. The proof of this pudding is, if he had created a requisition as Casey McCullough 4, or created a contract, or he doesn't have this one, he doesn't have access. Bad example, because he doesn't have access to any contracts or anything else. He can only do requisitions. But if he had a PO as Casey McCullough 4, we didn't have to move it somewhere else. We didn't have part of conversion. We didn't move these transactions attached to these disabled duplicate users to someone else. That kind of holds up to that custodial account. So as you go through in UAT and want to look at this, if you know users that were all the duplicate users, you want to go, okay, let me pull up or disable a user from a certain profile and then log in as a different user in that same organization with that same profile and see that you can, look at their POs and do different things. So it's a good reminder here that this holds up for that use case as well, right? Where we're essentially, I think that's why we had these, was some of them, they had them because they're doing different orgs, but some people had the multiple IDs for custodial purposes as well. Any other questions around that? If not, I take a couple of questions and then probably take a break before we talk security.
So this is Terry, just
Yeah.
based on other discussions we had before, you have a
Terry, you're cutting in and out, Terry. I don't know why, but I didn't hear any of your question.
Okay, Middlesex County, for instance, there's a lady there that does economic development and broadband. So she's gonna have the opportunity when she goes in to pick which entity she's buying for, right?
Correct.
Okay, but got same email, it's just gonna show her the 3 that she can choose from.
Yeah, I think when I logged in as Shane, you can see that Shane's account was connected to a lot. So, but when Shane was doing a requisition, right, it
Yes.
defaulted to his home, but he's got a lot of,
Okay.
he's got a lot because I think we gave him everything, but very similar. If they had extra, they could choose the organization.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Mark, this is Ange. So I don't have a question specific to this, but I do have a follow-up question from John's demonstration yesterday. Is now a good time, or is there another?
Sure. No, you can shoot it. If I go, then during the break, I'll wrangle John and get him to come answer it, but you can certainly ask it.
All right, so he was showing us how to set up allocation levels.
Mhm.
And so yesterday afternoon, I went up and started playing with it. I have an agency who's completely they're doing an overhaul of all of their account coding and current. So we're taking away the old and then putting in the new. With even next, how do you associate a value to an allocation code? Like I can create an account code or a project code or any kind of level. But is that an ETL that's done through a JIRA ticket, or will we have access as we do now in data management to actually upload the values or the data behind those levels?
All right, so let me see if I can piece this back together. If I was to go, no, I'm actually going to hop over to another environment. Makes it a little easier to show, and that way I don't screw up any data in UAT. What you would end up doing, let me go here, wrong place. And see if I answer your question. If it's not, then we'll wrangle John to help. So if I was managing the chart of account data for an organization, right? I come to this screen and does it matter which one I pick?
No.
All right, so we'll just say fund. Okay. So here's all, I have access to everything. That's why I'm seeing all kinds of things. But if I wanted to create a new fund, so the code value can be really anything. This is just we'll get you descriptions for what I think what they typically use, but I'm just going to make it this, and I'm going to assign it to, I'll just choose Senate of Virginia. The label can be, lack of a better one, because it's on it. So you asked about value. You know, the value would give me a value 101. I don't know what the general fund value is, but that would be what you would enter. There is also the ability to kind of a mass load. But is that what you're talking about when you said value, or are you talking about something?
Yeah, I was talking about, I couldn't figure out how to get to this. I don't think that we had access to manage.
Oh, yeah. So what I just showed you, how you access it here through this maintain chart of accounts. This is coming. It'll be there in UAT by 8.3.
Okay.
It is. So if you look on UAT right now, you don't see that link. It's just a
Gotcha.
special page. You can go through admin, but I don't want to teach you how to get there that way.
Okay,
Yeah, that's all. It's just there are some managed pages we built to make it easier. If you really want to keep testing it, I can show you how to get there through data browse. Well, I'll just show you guys because it's not killer. But until 8.3, if you go to admin data browse, you can find, like if I type fund here, this just allows you to get to the fund table, right? Without a special screen. But where you were, so here's my fund table. You can see here, I don't see the value, but if I click in, if I click the create. Oh, you're right, it's not on there. They cheated. They didn't put the actual fund. So now I know why you were struggling. Because there is no, they didn't expose that column to allow you to put the ad. What I can do is I'll send you, I think in UAT, those pages are there, just not the funny page to get to it. Lisa, I can give you guys the URLs to directly access those pages in the meantime. If God want to hold people up, if they want to start playing, I may just prove myself that it is there. Bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to cheat and try and go directly to it. Oh. Let me see if fund browse. I'll look after it after we're during the break to see. Now I understand why you couldn't get to the value, right?
Yeah, this is Kimberly. I also had a follow-up question from yesterday, and then a couple
Sure.
other things that I think was on our agenda that we didn't go over. So you're okay with that? Okay. So I was able, under the addresses, I know yesterday John showed us how we would just put them in a deleted status rather than them. But I was able to delete an address by clicking on the trash can icon in its entirety.
There are, I don't know what access you are in as. There's certainly the ability to delete as an administrative privilege.
Okay.
But do you know what user you used?
So we just need to keep in our minds, never totally delete it by hitting the icon, just change the status.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing that would have an impact on any purchase orders if we totally just deleted it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we will have that ability anyway.
Yeah, it all depends on what user access you have at the moment. You are correct. I'll double check to see what's there.
Lisa's comment to me, I saw a comment from Lisa pop up.
Yes. Jira ticket with
Okay.
the user information.
Oh,
Okay.
right.
And the other thing was, is there a way to generate a full client list in the new EVA like we can do now? Like we could go in through data management and look at all the EVA clients? Is there a way to do that in the new platform?
It depends on your security, right? So if I look at, different, it all depends on what you're allowed to see and not see. The organizational list, when you say a full client list, are you talking about full client list of what? Like just the listing of
Everybody that's in EVA. So we can go to data management, I think it's called client list. And then we can see all of the like A100, 102, 103, whatever. We can see every agency that has an EVA account.
Right. So there's a lot of different ways, but yes, through security, there are ways to do that. You guys, there's that special case here, but you have to know where to go to get it. It's not going to be I don't know if that logic report will still exist or not, to tell you the truth, so we can double check. But there are, when John was looking here. Right, so you're talking about this level here, right? Who's on the entity table, correct?
Yes.
Right. You can see I have this list, and based on my security and what I'm doing, here we go down.
I mean, I think we need access to that, but I'll defer that to Barb. She thinks it's okay.
So the answer is yes. So you can see I just grabbed it here and just said download the Excel, and it's going to hopefully open my Excel with all this data. You just have to know how to get there, right?
And where did you go to get that again? I'm sorry, you were going so fast.
No, that's fine. So there's your list, right? The easiest way, again, there's lots of different ways. You go to data browse and go to this table, TORGAC, but you have to know what it is. Easiest way is this, under the analytics, there is this, and you guys will, from a learning perspective, probably want to go here anyway. Go to generate dimensions. And it's a fancy term, but we don't use commodity dimension. We don't worry about fiscal year. We don't use share. Just this organizational thing. It's really for reporting, but it's a very good way to look at your organizational structure, right? Here's the hierarchy, right? The enterprise, the subgroup, and entity is, entity is essentially your agency slash, wherever you want. And then organization is in your old term, the by sense orgs, right? So the easiest way to do it, I just knew that entity was the level you were asking me about.
Okay.
And just click the label, which then brought me to the data. And then with any one of these, in any one of these tables, if we've enabled it. Now, if it's not enabled, it's easy to do, but we have control over whether or not download to Excel is enabled, right?
Okay.
In this case, it is, because I'm who I am. I have access to all the orgs, which you guys will too. So it's just a matter of going to the TORGAC table and hitting the download to Excel button.
Okay.
You just have to know that TORGAC is the table. But that is the easiest way I would tell you guys to do it. Go to generate dimension, look at the organization structure, click entity, and then click download.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mark, it's again. If we go back to Casey, those things where he was disabled in OSIG and State Board of Elections. He actually is not supposed to be disabled. That was part of that spreadsheet that we did where we said which one is the primary and which ones are the sub ones. So is that when we do actually go live, will those be?
No, what happens to those is Kenneth gets moved. Oh, let me. Did I spell Kenneth wrong? Where can I find him now? Where am I? Oh, I'm in the wrong environment. Hold on. I was in the playground, wasn't I? Sorry, I'm slipping between different environments and got lost. So, to your point here about OSIG, all what actually happens, these have to remain inactive, but we go to his active one.
And they're
And if
gonna be,
and you add, let's just say A147.
Yeah, hover over his board perimeter mark, please. Yeah, so they're all associated.
okay. So go live, when I go in to check my people, I don't have to freak out that OSIG is disabled because whichever one we said was his primary is gonna have them underneath in that drop down.
Yeah, I see it. I see it has Office of State Inspector General, right? That's OSIG, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So for the rest of the team that knows they have a Casey McCullough and a Betty Muncie in their stuff, that when they have one to multiple entities, do some checking.
Yep.
On UAT to make sure you're seeing the same thing for your.
VITA, check
folks.
VITAs, check BGS.
DOC,
Yep.
DGS, yeah.
SARS.
Yep,
Yep.
dollars, yep. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Now, if it's not, I mean, if you really don't want to rely there, you can go down to the detail level to validate. Literally, go to Casey's org perimeter.
I'm okay with the hover. Less
Right.
clicks. is
And if you
So-
had to make a change, that's where you would.
I have a question, this is Kelly.
Sure.
So right now, this may be a stupid question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, because in my head, I'm not lining it up. So right now, if somebody has custodial care over something right now, what is that gonna look like in the new tool? Like, how do,
So remind me your custodial care. I
When there's a Burt scan.
yes, like if. Yeah,
Yeah.
how does that gonna look?
CHANDE, I think is the lady's name. She is currently in custodial care.
Okay.
But it's they're gonna be disabled because it's the same email address.
So it's given to Casey.
So my question is, if you're not in the same, is it the organization or your,
Site.
yeah? Because if you're not in the same site, but you have custodial care, so for instance, Bree is in a different site because she's not in the procurement department, but they gave the procurement department custodial care, the procurement would have to have access to that site. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah, similar to how we had to make sure Casey had all the right things. In that situation, yeah, if somebody had access custodially to something else, and we'd have to make sure that they're organizationally they're allowed to view that information.
But is it by the organization or by?
I say organization, I mean the entire tree. So when you talk about how it does it, the entire levels it looks at. That's what I mean by organization, not do I do it at the activity level or the site level. So that's why. So don't be confused by when I say organization. It's it's looking at your entire tree, going, should you have access to this or not?
So if I'm a DGS person user, then I can take over anybody's account that's in DGS.
No. I don't know what you mean by take over.
Right. I think that's the word.
I would have access to go in and act on their purchase order. Or do a receiving or.
Yes, yeah, you are correct. Right now, when we talk about security, so custodial account, there is no custodial account, idea inside of the new solution. It is who you are and whatever you have access based on your profiles and your organization setup. So regardless of who you are, if you have, when you get to a PO, it's going to be driven by your profile, not that whatever you're allowed to do based on the profile, right? And POs right now are secured organizationally, and you can see and act on POs if you have the requisitioner profile, right? Or the sealed sourcing, the higher ones.
And we're gonna talk about profile access when we get back after our break, like the security.
Right. Yep.
All right, I have one more question.
Let me get mine over.
Go ahead, Lauren.
I got a question. When will we need to use the block a user basically? Because we had disable, delete, and block as an option. When will we use block?
I don't think you guys will use blocked. I believe blocked comes into play when somebody tries to log in with the password a couple of times, and they can essentially block themselves. I am not aware of a use case where you'd use block, but we'll let you know if there is. I don't know all the use cases for, what are some of the use cases around when you want to make sure someone can't get in the system.
All right, I have one more question. The last one before the break, okay? So
Sure.
if we have a client that changes their name, which that seems to be happening more often than not, what is the process for doing that? Is that something that we do? Is that a JIRA ticket? What is the process for that?
And let me make sure I got this right, so I'm doing the right things. So in this case,
So for example, Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, I think 2 years ago, changed their name to Department of Wildlife Resources.
Right. So the who, I think we probably have a little bit of wiggle room on who. But yeah, if you need to change the name changes is really coming here and just changing the name. I don't know that we've necessarily defined. I am assuming you guys can do this on your own. If they have decentral user management, they'd be able to see their own record and change it on their own if they really wanted to. But the simple case is this is just a label and you can change it, right? We are not touching. There will
Right.
always be this code, but if this needs to be something different, the simple case is go to the entity table and change the name.
And that's all, that's the only place it needs to be changed, is right there.
Correct. Yeah. It's not like current solution because it is one cohesive unit, one application. That is the only spot where you need to make a change to change the name of an organization.
Okay, but they cannot change their entity ID number, because
No,
that's,
right.
oh,
So they
No IDs can change. I think if they really caused heartburn over that, that's why that's why it looks that way. Those are other stories. No, IDs do not change.
And they don't change in the current system.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's a data integrity thing. It'll screw up all kinds of reporting and all kinds of. Joel might quit if we try to do that.
yeah, like behavioral health, they changed their name a while back, and their current acronym is like a mile long.
Right.
So that cannot be changed.
So it should be
Dylan's
much easier for you guys to manage organizational name changes. And same goes for if they want to change, at the site level too, right? If it's no
Wildlife-
different.
Wildlife Resources will forever be DGIF. Is that what I'm hearing?
403.
Can I jump in for just a second on that? Because we've talked about this before, and for the time being right now, the acronym that is associated with the client ID number, like A194 DGS, that is a metadata field, like it cannot change. So we've talked to Joel after go live about finding a way that we can split those fields out so it's not a primary key and we do have the flexibility of changing. So immediately at go live, no, you're not going to be able to update the acronym, but in the future, we're planning to separate those two fields out. So that way, if they do need to be updated, we can have that flexibility.
I would say to my team, that is not to be repeated outside of this room, please.
That's why we,
Until we know that can happen and what the implications are, please do not repeat that to an agency.
that's
Yeah,
why we got
Right now,
smarter.
it cannot.
That's why we got smarter at the site level and got rid of meaningful organizational IDs. They're just numbers. We just had some legacy stuff around the agency codes that is still there. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. It's nice not get answering without having to scramble to John to ask. All right, I propose, I know some others have a 10 o'clock meeting. I propose we take a 10-minute siesta. Is that good?
All right, different topic when you come back, right? So stop the recording.
All right.
So 10 minutes or
Yep.
10:01.
Yes, and please, whoever's in the room, please,
I got
when the
it. I
10
got it.
o'clock starts, make sure you record, please.
We got it. Thank